What's up? My name is Xana and welcome to the Unplanned Chaos. The TLDR of this whole thing is I have been a reader all my life. I love reading. I've read far too many books to count and I haven't kept track of any of them. But I decided, I'm going to try to do what I've seen other YouTubers do, which is monthly reading recaps. Just like, oh, here's what I read, here's a brief summary, here's what I thought. It's mostly just a diary for me, because honestly, I don't expect people to watch this. But if you are watching this, hi! Like I said, welcome to the chaos. So we're gonna do September's reading recap, and I may just disappear forever. I may never edit this. Who knows? We're gonna see. So without further ado, let's get into the books that I read, which are, I just would like to say before we get to some of these, I apologize for some of the things that are on this list, because I should be better than this. But I'm not. So first off, the first two that I read, not necessarily going in chronological order here, we're going mostly in chronological order, but I'm going to start off with what I read for school. I'm not actually going to list most of the things that I do read for lit class. These two counted because they're like complete pieces instead of segments. So that would be, for my Brit Lit class, I read Beowulf again, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. And Beowulf is like, I read it in high school. It was a big inspiration for a lot of media that came after it, so no hard feelings towards Beowulf. I enjoyed it, more or less. Gawain, I had never actually read before. I honestly enjoyed it. It was pretty good. I had some fun Canvas discussions with people about it. They were for school. What else can I say? After that, and here's where I need to start apologizing for my reading choices. I read Circles of Seven and Tears of a Dragon. Now these are both part of Brian Davis's series Dragons in Our Midst, which if you have heard of it, I'm sorry. If you haven't, I'm sorry for telling you about it. This is a young adult Christian urban fantasy, I want to say, series. Back in King Arthur's time, Merlin turned all the good dragons into humans using a miracle. I know. So like in now modern day, or I guess it's not modern, it's like the 2000s. This was written in the 2000s. So, in quote unquote modern day, most of them have been killed by dragon slayers. Some of them have children, and the children have like dragon traits. So it mainly follows like a Billy who can breathe fire and Bonnie who has dragon wings. So these are the third and fourth books of the 4-book series. I read the other two earlier in the year. And things that I have written down are nostalgia, and also they go to hell. In Circles of Seven, that's like the entire plot. They go to hell, and Bonnie dies for a while, spoilers, and goes to heaven, and then she comes back. There's a supercomputer, and his name is Larry. The supercomputer was not there for the first two books. And in the fourth book, now that they've gone to hell, they go to dragon hell, and they save like the spirits of the dragons because dragons don't have souls. And Billy's dragon, Jesus. Yeah, so, we're not going to talk about that any further. Don't read this series. Trust me. Don't read this series. It's bad. The only reason I can read these books now are because I read them as a kid, and I can look back at them and go, wow, that's so bad. Just horrible. But like, they're really chaotic, so I kind of have a fun time reading them. After that, I read Fantastic Land. How do I describe Fantastic Land? Fantastic Land is in this world where this hurricane hits Florida, and it actually hits a lot higher than people were expecting, so it like devastates this whole section of Florida that nobody was expecting to be hit, including a theme park called Fantastic Land. It's a fictional theme park, obviously. And there's a bunch of employees who are like stranded there, most of them teenagers, because they were there as like part of an emergency protocol to like lock down the park, and they've got like all the supplies and stuff, and they should be fine. But what do you call it? First responders, they get there like couple weeks, maybe a month later, and it's like horrible. There's like gore everywhere, dead bodies, cannibalism. I think it's like thrillers with a little bit of horror, and essentially the book is written as like this fictional reporter is interviewing all of these people, so it's as like a series of interviews and some like transcribed footage and stuff from the park of like people who are in the park, people who were involved with the park, that sort of thing. And so it's like sort of recapping all of the horrible things that happened during the time that Fantastic Land was cut off from the rest of the world. And honestly, I didn't think this was going to be good, but it was. Or maybe it's just me. It was interesting. I really enjoyed it. So I read it in like one afternoon. I was like, this is great, which probably says some things about me. All of these say things about me that I'm not sure I should be putting on the internet, but oh well. After that, I read Peter Pan, which you'd be surprised to learn that I am an adult and I've never read Peter Pan. I don't know how that happened. Actually, I've been like a huge fan of this series called like the Peter and the Starcatcher series by Dave Barry and Ridley Pearson, I think. It's like a retelling of Peter Pan. So I've read like plenty of Peter Pan retellings that I've seen Peter Pan, and I love the 2003 Peter Pan movie, mostly. But I'd somehow never read Peter Pan, so I decided, I'm gonna read it. So I checked it out, and I read it, and it didn't age well. And I feel like no one's particularly surprised by this, and neither was I, because, you know, I've seen more modern Peter Pan stuff that didn't age well, but let's just say I like the adaptations better. Sorry, Peter Pan. After that, I read Small Spaces, which is kind of like a junior horror book. How do I even describe Small Spaces? Hold on, we're gonna pull up the Goodreads blurb, because frankly, I don't remember most of this book. The cover was pretty. You put a scarecrow on the cover, I'm gonna read it. Yeah, so she gets this book, and then she goes to a farm, and the farm is the farm from the book, apparently, and bad things start happening, and then she and two of her classmates get stuck in like a parallel world, and they have to get out. And it was okay. It wasn't bad. It was definitely like kiddie horror. You know, it's not like horror. I wasn't expecting it to be. I think I saw it in like a bookstore, and I went, ooh, that seems cool, and I slapped it on my Goodreads list, and I came back later, and I was like, oh, okay. So after that, I read Long Live the Pumpkin Queen. This is like a book that's set after, obviously, The Night Before Christmas, and it's about Sally and Jack getting married, and then Sally like struggling with her identity as the new queen or pumpkin queen of Halloween Town. And it's kind of weird. First off, it's written in first person, and like I don't have a problem with first person. I read Percy Jackson. We all read Percy Jackson. I don't mind first person. It felt weird as a choice for it to be in first person for whatever reason. It gives Sally this like whole backstory that like frankly I was not looking for in my Nightmare Before Christmas book. I won't spoil it for you if you want to go read this. It's like she unleashes some monster on Halloween Town on accident, and then she has to like solve the problem, and she finds out about her past and all this stuff. And also the Queen of England is there. And I'm not really sure why that was necessary, but she is. Moving on. After that, okay. So I read Seeds of Rebellion and Chasing the Prophecy by Brandon Mull. I actually have Seeds of Rebellion here with me. So these are the second and third books of a trilogy, the Beyonders trilogy by Brandon Mull. And let me tell you, I read these when I was younger. I have been doing a lot of nostalgia reading lately, going back and revisiting some of the books that I read as a kid. I read a lot of Brandon Mull when I was in middle school, and I think early high school. And I'm not a big fantasy person, but I really enjoyed his fantasy. So I was like, okay, I'll go back and revisit the Beyonders trilogy because I remember good things about it, and they've got a really good audiobook. So I started listening to an audiobook, and then I got sucked in, and then I had read all three books, and they devastated me. I'm like incapable of being normal about this trilogy at this point in time. I should probably summarize this for you. Essentially, it follows these two kids, but like it starts off with Jason Walker, who bear with me, he gets swallowed by a hippopotamus and finds himself in another world, and this world is called Lyrian, and he meets another girl named Rachel. They're from Earth, the Beyond, and they have been summoned there by an oracle to try to defeat the evil emperor who's like trying to take over all of Lyrian. And it's kind of wild. So I read the first book like month before last. In the second book, they're on a quest to go get a prophecy from the last oracle in Lyrian about if there's a future where they can defeat the evil emperor Maldor. And in the third book, they're like carrying out the prophecy. It's really good. Like, it's for a middle grade series. It gets surprisingly adult and like mature at points, and a lot of characters die, and I won't tell you who, but many of them were my favorite characters. And it's not like really cheap character death. Okay, some of it is. There's like this race of characters, like they will only live 2 years, and so their whole idea is like die bravely, and so many of them just die. I don't know if there's a single named one that survives. I think they all die. Now that I think about that, I don't like that as much. So a lot of characters die. In middle school, I was untouchable. I was not crying over books. Now I am 22, and I am crying over middle grade fantasy What is up with that? There's a lot of books on this recap that I would say don't read. This is one series that I would say do read. Very good. Holds up to me as an adult, and I really, really enjoyed it. I might have purchased my own copies. This is a library copy, but I've definitely gone and purchased my own copies. Anyway, it's a really interesting fantasy world. I like a lot of the relationships. I like the snark between the two characters. Actually, just all of the characters. There's a lot of like fun snark, a lot of fun banter. There's a lot of really impactful, meaningful moments. I like the plot a lot, honestly. I think it's really well constructed. It's a fun little put together series, and it hurts. So yeah, that is Beyonders. After that, I read Harrow Lake, which is another horror book. I don't know if you guys are starting to sense a trend here. It's about the daughter of a famous horror filmmaker. He's attacked, and so she goes to stay with her grandmother in the town that he made like his most famous horror movie in, which is also her mother's hometown. That's how they met. And things start to go weird. It's a weird town where people disappear, and there's some sort of monster, supposedly. It was fine. It wasn't particularly memorable to me. I think what bothered me most was there were a lot of elements with like bug horror and teeth and stuff, and I was really hoping that it would go somewhere. There were all of these elements that I like in horror, and then none of them went anywhere that I liked. It's not badly written. I honestly liked the end. It just wasn't for me, personally. So it was good. After that, I read the Beyond the Spiderwick Chronicles, another middle grade urban fantasy series. I know you're beginning to sense a trend here. I recently watched the movie, and I was like, hey, wasn't there like a second book series? And I'd read them at one point, but I'd completely forgotten like the whole plot. So I went back and I checked them out. It's a trilogy. The Nixies Song, A Giant Problem, and The Worm King. And I gotta say, I don't like them as much as the first. I mean, obviously, it's like, I'm not gonna judge it on like quality of writing or anything because it's a kid's series. But in terms of like plot and characters and just everything that was going on, I liked the first series better. And the saving grace, pun not intended, of the book series to me is the artwork, which is absolutely gorgeous, and the fact that the Grace kids from the first series show up pretty regularly. Even after all these years, I'm still deeply fond of Jared Grace. I didn't like the other characters so much. I didn't really care what was going on. A favorite character goes a long way for me. So after Beyond the Spiderwick Chronicles, I read the last two books of the Unicorn Chronicles by Bruce Coville. That would be Dark Whispers and The Last Hunt. It's a 4-book series, and it's like, I don't want to say it's like a children's series, because like the first 2 books are very obviously like a children's series, but then like it gets a lot more mature and adult in the last 2 books, and a lot longer. Like the first book is like this thin, and then like by the time you get to the last book, it's like 400 or 500 pages. There's a lot going on. So essentially, it's the story of a girl who finds herself in the land of the unicorns in this other world, and she's trying to like find the queen of the unicorns and save her grandmother and, you know, defeat the unicorn slayers. But it was surprisingly good. I really enjoyed it. This is another series that I started when I was a kid, and I never got a chance to finish it. I finally did. I read all of them. I actually listened to them in audiobook form. And it is like a full cast audio production, so like kudos to them for that. The voice of Alice Angel from Benny and the Ink Machine voiced a few characters, and I was not ready for that. It was good. I'm struggling to like separate the plot of Dark Whispers and The Last Hunt in my head. I really cannot. They're like one entity to me, and I've kind of forgotten most of the details. But I liked a lot of the character relationships. It had some kind of funky world building. It was alright. I'm not really sure why there's a prison of rainbow light that you can only access with gems, but you know, it's fantasy. Okay. Not something I would like particularly write home about, but I was like glad to have finally finished it. I think it's pretty, of all the unicorn series out there, of which there are a lot, and I have read a lot, I would say it's pretty good. After that, I read Hidden Pictures. I think I had this on my list because it was labeled as horror. We're gonna check. It was not horror. Not really. Oh yeah. Horror, thriller, mystery. Okay, it's not like horror, it's paranormal. So you have Mallory, she's a recovering addict. She gets a job, like essentially babysitting this kid and living in these people's guest house in like this nice part of Philadelphia. And the kid, he has like an imaginary friend, and then he starts drawing really weird, creepy pictures. And Mallory thinks there's like a ghost haunting him, and so she's trying to like figure out what's going on with the ghost and the creepy pictures and the imaginary friend with the help of a hot neighbor guy. The ending is not what you expect. Or not necessarily the ending, the twist is not what you expect. It gets to the point you're like, what? This is another one of those books that I checked out hoping for like horror, and then it wasn't any kind of horror that I necessarily liked. It was fine. Yeah, that's kind of the gist of it. It was alright. After that, I read Alias Grace by Margaret Atwood, and it's like an actual historical figure. She was like a teenage girl, and she was convicted for the murders of like her employer and his mistress, along with some other guy, and then she dodged the death penalty, and this other guy died, and then nobody could decide whether or not she was actually innocent. And so the book is like some guy interviewing her and her telling him what happened, and it's set in 1843, and it wasn't for me. I'm sure it's a good book. It was well written, and it was interesting. It was just, I don't like historical fiction. But if you like unreliable narrators, this one's for you. It was not for me, and that's okay. After Alias Grace, I read, The Twisted Ones, which is yet another horror book. It's about the story of this girl who goes with her dog. I say girl, she's like in her 30s. Her grandmother was a terrible person, and her grandmother died, and she goes to clean out her grandmother's house for her dad. Turns out her grandmother was a hoarder, and she finds some really weird journal of her step-grandfather's, and she starts reading it, and things start getting really weird. And that's kind of all that I can say without giving away spoilers and also revealing how much of the plot I have desperately forgotten. I really like the writing style. The writing style is like fun, it's like funny, it has like this really good balance of humor and horror. I think that worked really well. The deer horror, phenomenal. I really liked most of the characters, which is like a lot more than I can say for a lot of these books that I've been reading. I liked the characters. It just was an instance of, just like Harrow Lake, this one had so many elements. They were going so well for it, and it didn't deliver the way I wanted. It was like Fae, deer, Appalachia. I'm trying to remember what happened in this book. Like, surely this would have been for me. No, but it was good. I think I read this one because I watched some video. It was either like a horror recommendation video or just somebody else's reading recommendations. I know it was Carrie Can Read, I think. And I was like sold by the description, and then I went and read it, and I was like, oh, okay. So not quite what I would have liked, but that's on me. If you like dogs, the dog doesn't die, don't worry about it. It's a good dog book. After that, I read 1:35 a.m. from the Fazbear Fright series, and I am not going to summarize this. If you want a summary of the FNAF books, you go watch Game Theory. I'm not doing that here. All I will say about this is, of the 3 that I've read, because I've read, it's like the 3rd one in the series, and I've read 3 so far. This one was probably my least favorite. I didn't particularly care for any of the stories. Reading these books is like just getting hit repeatedly over the head with the most depressing endings someone is capable of thinking up. It sucks to read these sometimes. Like, they're not bad. It's really good horror at points, but also it's just like, God, it's so depressing. Don't read this if you're hoping for a happy ending. Yeah, that was 1:35 a.m. It's fine. After that, and here we come to another one of my bad choices, I read the first 4 books of the Knights of Erythrae series. So that would be Sir Kendrick and the Castle of Belleone, Sir Bentley and Holbrook Court, Sir Dalton and the Shadow Heart, and Lady Carlis and the Waters of Baru. Okay, so this is another instance of Christian YA fantasy, and it's like Jesus but knights, and it's bad. Like, when I say Dragons in Our Midst is bad, I mean like bad in kind of a fun way to read because it's absolutely absurd. When I say this is bad, I mean this is so bad. I hope no one ever reads these books. They're awful. It's just bad. Each one is like about a different character, obviously, and the only reason I ended up reading these is we had the first 2 books when I was growing up, and they were my brother's books, and they were like boy books, so I couldn't read them for whatever reason. And I always wanted to read the second one because it has what looked like the Loch Ness Monster on it. And I was like, I love the Loch Ness Monster. I want to read this. Now, having read it, I wish I hadn't. I'm not even going to summarize them to you. It's just that bad. Please do not read this series. You know, if I want to read an allegory, I'm going to go read Narnia. It's like kind of like an audio drama, the way they do the audiobooks, where they have like sound effects, and sound effects are so loud. So there'll be like a sword fight going on. In the background, there's like super loud sword clanging noises and like screaming. And I'm like, I can't hear what you're saying. It's horrible. That would be the Knights of Erythrae. I still have 2 books left to go, and yes, I'm going to read them. Yes, I'm going to regret it. No, you shouldn't. After that, I read Dream Pony from the Sandy Lane Stable series. In my notes, I wrote, I'm not even going to explain. I own them. Okay, sometimes I like to read pony books from my childhood. I was a horse girl growing up. I needed something to read that was not bad horror or bad Christian fantasy. So I read a pony book, and it's about one of the characters wins a pony in a competition, and then she can't keep it at her normal stables, and she has to go to a different stables, and then she finds out it's a bad place. If you've ever read, like, any kid horse book, you know what it's like. It's not bad. After that, I read From Below, which is another horror book. This one is about a team that they find like the wreckage of this ship that was lost years ago, and so they go out as a documentary crew to film it and like get some footage in the wreckage and see if they can piece together what happened to the ship. And when they get there, the remote operated vehicles and everything, like all the equipment goes down, and so they have to go down, like physically dive down there to get their footage, and things go weird. I mean, it's a horror book and it's a sunken ship. So use your imagination, because I'm not gonna spoil it for you. And this is one of the ones, like, it got kind of gross at points. I got deeply annoyed towards the end. I was so mad at one of the characters. I was like, I know this is horror and somebody has to be stupid, but like, you are stupider than normal. It was good. I enjoyed it. After From Below, I read This Is a Story of a Happy Marriage by Ann Patchett. I love Ann Patchett. Finally, a good book. Okay, there needs to be like a 6th star on Goodreads for Ann Patchett alone. I love her writing so much. Most of her writing, or at least most of her books, are fiction, and they're really good. And this one, I can't really summarize it because it's a collection of essays instead of fiction. This one's nonfiction. So it's a collection of all her essays, or not all of her essays, but a lot of her essays that she's written for magazines and stuff over the years, and some other ones that she's added in. It's like stuff about her dog, stuff about her bookstore. I mean, a lot of them are about writing, because she's a writer, but I think the getaway car in here was one of my favorites. It was really, really good. Absolutely wonderful. Read Ann Patchett. That's all I got to say. After This Is the Story of a Happy Marriage, I read Curse of the Spider King, which is the first in a duology, I believe, called the Baronfell Prophecies by Wayne Thomas Batson. This is another Christian YA fantasy book. I know. So, you know, okay, like 800 years ago, the evil spider people overthrew the elf people who were like allegorically Christians or whatever. They stole like the High Lords, not lords. They stole their children, 7 of them, and like because they couldn't kill them because of some curse, they like dumped them on Earth, and then were like, we'll come back to kill you later when there won't be a curse. So now all of these kids are hitting the age of reckoning, which is like 13, and they're developing magical powers. I don't know why the elves have superpowers, or like it's maybe just these specific elves. There's like 7 of them, and they're like all in 7th grade, and they have like this just ridiculous powers. One of them is blue. The elves have come to get them, and they're trying to like escape Earth and get back to the world and defeat the Spider King. You know, it's really unclear. This whole book, it feels like a prequel. Like, it feels like this is all set up for what's gonna happen, but like the plot never actually kicks in. It's just the whole novel, and there's far too many characters. There's like 7 or 8 kids, and it's just like all of this stuff is going on around them, and then there's also all of these people chasing them. There's all the people trying to protect them. It's like the backstory, and they're reading this book. They're literally reading the history, and then you're reading the history of the elf people, and it's a lot. It's not that I don't like middle grade fiction, it's just that this is bad. It's like, I hate to say. Also, I would like to mention that I listened to this. I got the audiobook instead of reading the book. And I've got to say, it is a uniquely awful audiobook. It's just bad. I've heard a lot of bad audiobooks. I mentioned some of them earlier. This is like bad. But I don't know, bless him, whoever is narrating this. He's just like, half of his voices are like, I'm not even going to try to mimic them because it's just so bad. There is not a single good voice in this audiobook. It's bad. Very, very bad voice acting. So when I read the second one, which yes, I am going to read the second one, when I read it, I'm going to be reading it and not listening to it because I cannot deal with another like however many hours of that it was. I can't do it again. No. This is just one of those books that it's another one of the ones like a Holbrook Court that I had built up in my mind because we had it when I was a kid and it was my brother's and I wasn't allowed to read it, and now that I've read it as an adult, it's a letdown. After that one, on a high note, I read The Fiancé Farce, and I don't even like romance, but I loved this. Essentially, if you've ever read a fake dating AU, congratulations, this is the book for you. It's queer, it's funny. So there's this character, Tansy, and she has been lying to her stepfamily that she's got a girlfriend in order to get out of like family dinners and stuff. She runs a bookstore, so when they asked what her name was, she just looked down and saw the model on the romance cover and knew who it was, and so just said her name, Gemma, So when the model shows up at her step cousin's wedding, and her stepsister's like, "Oh, that Gemma?" She's like, "Oh my god, they're gonna find out that I've been lying about dating this woman for like 6 months now." But Gemma is like super rich, and she's like the heir to this company. But the rule is she can't inherit the company if she's not married by like the board meeting at the end of the year. So she's like 3 months to find somebody and get married. But it has to be like a legitimate marriage, not like, oh, we just got like married out of convenience. So when they're like, "Oh, yeah, you're dating Tansy, right?" Like, "You're not actually dating Tansy." Gemma's like, "Oh yeah, no, totally. We're engaged." And Tansy's like, "We're what?" So the whole thing is like an arrangement between the two of them for a marriage of convenience in order to save Tansy's bookstore and Gemma inherit her company. But what happens is obviously they fall in love, they get married, and it's so funny because I don't like romance, I don't like fake dating, and I don't like marriage. And yet, this book was so good. It's really fun. Like, one of the villains is a little bit one note. It's just kind of like, but why though? But it was a fun time. I laughed a lot. I had a delightful time. And it was a really high note after, the absolute letdown of so many of the books that I read this month. Highly recommend. Really enjoyed it. Very funny. The last thing I read was Rebel Robin, the Stranger Things novel. I wouldn't call myself like a big Stranger Things fan. Like, I've seen all 4 seasons. I read a couple of Stranger Things novels before, like the one about Eleven's mom. And so I was like, oh, there's a Robin book. It's a prequel novel. If you haven't seen Stranger Things, you're not going to understand a word that I'm saying, but that's okay. It's like taking place during Robin's sophomore year or whatever, and it's the year that she had a crush on Tammy Thompson. And it's fine. She goes to prom. Again, I'm not like wild for Stranger Things, so I'm not really sure what I was expecting. It's in first person, and like, as far as I can tell, or like remember, the other 2 novels weren't in first person that I read, so it wasn't really clear to me why it was written in first person. It's a very big tonal difference. I think maybe that just got me. The thing about the novels is they introduce a lot of characters, and none of these characters are going to come back in the show. I kept forgetting that I was reading a Stranger Things novel. Obviously, nothing Stranger Things-ish is going on, except for throughout the background of the novel, it's like, oh, Will's missing. Oh, they found Will's body. Oh, never mind, it's fine. And it's just like in the background, you have like, oh, there's Nancy Wheeler. Oh, there's Joyce. The one part about the book that I really liked and really identified with is Robin not getting like the romance and like that's going on in like high school and not wanting to date and being really annoyed that everybody's like pressuring her to date. She's like, I don't want a boyfriend. I identified a lot with that. But other than that, it wasn't awful and it wasn't the greatest thing that I've ever read. So yeah, that is everything that I read in September. And like half of it was just deeply questionable, and I can't promise that if I record October will be any better. A little bit better. Still a lot of middle grade fantasy. I make no promises that I will be back next month. I make no promises that I won't have read an annoying amount of Christian fiction, and I make no promises that I won't have reread Beyonders and make you hear about it all over again. It's just, me and my questionable library checkouts against the world. If you have stuck around this long, congratulations. I don't think even I would make it through this video. This was a social experiment. Signing off. Go read a book.